Are you part of the great resignation, that mass exodus of people who are leaving their jobs to start something new? Then something you need to consider is what to do with your company 401k. Rather than just rolling it over, consider opening a truly self-directed IRA. With a self-directed IRA, a truly self-directed IRA, your retirement portfolio can include real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrency, notes, loans, a new business, and traditional equities like stocks and bonds. You can make any investment the law allows with a truly self-directed retirement account. Listen, you probably have questions, so why not take the time to get the answers? Start with going to IRAadvantage.com. Then talk to the truly self-directed IRA professionals at IRA Advantage.
Would you like to learn more about truly self-directed IRAs? Then visit IRAadvantage.com, view our videos, and call IRA Advantage. Let us set up a truly self-directed IRA for you. That's IRAadvantage.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's my favorite day of the week because it's First Amendment Friday, and of course, a First Amendment Friday honoring your free speech and your freedom of religion rights. Heading into an Independence Day weekend, it rarely gets better than that. So, if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every night at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Glad to have you with me. Now, I want to introduce you to Josiah Joyner. If you haven't heard Josiah before, he's an undergrad student at Stanford University, and don't immediately draw the conclusion he is, in fact, one of the extreme minority at Stanford University who happens to consider himself a conservative, which is a rare item on the Palo Alto campus. Josiah, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Lars. It's great to be back.
Well, you've been on before to talk about some of the great pieces that you've written for the Conservative Review on campus, but today I want to start at least with the Supreme Court's decision, the one that came down yesterday on so-called affirmative action, which I call naked bigotry, because that's what it is, telling smart Asian students, you're not allowed to come to school here, whether it's Stanford or Harvard or wherever, because you may be smart, but you're Asian, and therefore we're rejecting you because you're Asian. Now, I think the Supreme Court made the right decision. I want to know what you think, and I want to know what you think the sense is of what people at the Stanford University campus, which is notoriously liberal, what they are thinking about it, and whether or not they're actually going to comply with what the Supreme Court has imposed.
Absolutely. Well, look, Lars, I agree with you completely. This was the right decision by the court to overturn affirmative action and end race-based policies in higher education. Because, look, while race is still an indicative factor of one's socioeconomic status, it no longer defines the outcome that you can achieve in this country. And these schools desire diversity in many senses, and not just racial diversity, but they proudly claim that they have students from all 50 states and all 100 different countries, which are good and support the goals of the university. And that's similar for racial diversity, but if schools are going to achieve racial diversity, it needs to be achieved the right way, not through racial discrimination, which is what we've seen at UNC, at Harvard, and very similarly at Stanford. And so what these schools need to do if they really want to actually achieve diversity is go to these communities, go to these lower socioeconomic backgrounds, these zip codes of students from lower opportunities, and really pour resources and invest in those. And what we've seen at these schools like Stanford are these massive DEI bureaucracies. Stanford has more administrators than they have, or more administrators than they have undergrads. And if they really, truly are going to care about diversity and want to achieve those goals, I think these schools need to really reallocate those resources and pour it in. But right now, affirmative action has just allowed these schools to circumvent making any real change in trying to heal any racial divide, because they could merely use race as a factor of admission.
You know, it's funny, Josiah, the only place I disagree with you a little bit, just a tiny bit, is this. All those smart Asian kids, some of whom go to Stanford, some of whom go to Harvard, the ones who do get in, are all of them from rich families, or are all of them from families who've done something which is tell their kids, we want to see good grades in high school and in every grade of school, and we want to see you do really well on the SAT score, and we might even invest a few dollars into a tutor to try to help you out and get you to the point where you can get into a top flight school if that's what you want to do. Is there anything in any of that the average black family or Hispanic family or Native American family couldn't do as well or just as well?
No, Absolutely. They're entirely capable of it. And another interesting thing, Lars, is from some of my previous reporting, I kind of showed that Stanford had reduced white enrollment by about 15% in the past decade. And so white enrollment at Stanford is currently about 22%. So cut that in half. That's about 10% white male. And consider that two kind of some of the biggest categories for those are going to be legacy students, donors, and athletes, which are predominantly, from legacies and donors especially, predominantly white. Well, so we think about these racial this affirmative action policy, which is hurting Asian students, white students, but it's hurting the lower income white students because now you have no room left for the low income middle class white students. And what it does is it doesn't hurt the wealthy white students, the legacies, the donors. It's hurting the lowest income of white students, and that's really what these policies are doing. So yes, students from all backgrounds are capable of this, and what these policies do is hurt the students from the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds.
Well, and I guess I'd have to ask somebody, no matter how much you believe in diversity and all that, Josiah, you're telling me that one of the top universities in America, and that's Stanford, has 1 student in 5 that's white, the male or female, in a country that's 75.5% white. So in other words, whites are now the majority population in the country, but they're very much the minority. Less than a quarter of the Stanford University campus is made up of white students. Is that diversity?
No, well, it's not. And look, what we've seen these schools do is racially engineer these classes and reduce white enrollment by 15% in the last decade, increase Asian enrollment by 10% in the last decade, kind of seemingly online with the beginning of the Students for Fair Admissions case, almost like they're compensating for that, while at the same time holding all other racial minorities constant. And so what you're seeing these schools do is artificially manipulate, racially engineer these classes to construct whatever racially diverse class they want. And so it's not right, it's wrong, and it's time for schools to move on. And I'm glad that the Supreme Court brought down this decision yesterday. It was incredible.
Because I guess I'd ask them, if you're telling us a diverse population, one made up of all gender or both genders, I almost said all genders, both genders. I'm not adopting that standard. Both genders, all colors, all sexualities, all the rest of this stuff. How is it you're presenting the students at Stanford? I mean, I would imagine the school, if they would talk to me, would say, we're preparing these kids to take jobs all over America and potentially all over the world. And you're doing it on a campus that, at least among the students, is 80% BIPOC. Preparing them to go into a country that's only 30% BIPOC. Is that in other words, you'll be in this artificial environment at Stanford, which is not represented almost anywhere else in America.
Right. No, that's true. And what we need to see these schools, I think most important here, Lars, is that these schools are really focused on this mission to recruit and attract the top talent in the country. And what that means is using these metrics like SAT scores and GPA and not abolishing it, but being able to make these opportunity adjustments as well. So if there are students from these lower opportunity backgrounds, that you can make an opportunity adjustment based on income, based on the obstacles they've overcome and the barriers they've overcome. And that's how you can actually truly achieve these classes that are made up of the top talent in the world. And that's, I think, what we're going to have to see these schools do.
Josiah, keep up the great writing and stay a conservative. Don't let Stanford University convert you into a liberal. Glad to be with you on a First Amendment Friday. Pleasure to be with you. And if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's easy. 866-HEY-LARS. And naysayers go to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. You can vote in our Twitter poll at Lars Larson Show, or you can go to my website. The vote counts the same at larslarson.com. And you can send an email to talk@larslarson.com. Back in just a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. Or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and I do want to talk to our friend Bob Barr, former CIA analyst and member of Congress, about something he's written about recently where he says America is starting to resemble the Twilight Zone. But Bob, welcome to the program. I want to ask you first about these decisions coming out of the U.S. Supreme Court today, because they're fantastic, and I'm not usually that pleased with what the U.S. Supreme Court does.
Yeah, every once in a while they do get it right, Lars, and particularly when you have Clarence Thomas writing a hard-hitting, constitutionally sound concurring opinion like he did today on the affirmative action case. It is something to cheer about. I mean, this is good news for the country. It's good news for race relations in our country. It's good news for education. And yet the three sourpusses on the Supreme Court, the three liberals, think it's the end of the world. It isn't. It's the beginning of hopefully a new day where merit, not race, will determine who gets into college.
And that's what should happen. And yet you get Joe Biden bashing the U.S. Supreme Court today. And I want to ask about the appropriateness of that.
Well, it's the same. Schumer's out there also. And remember, Schumer is one of those, along with Senator Whitehouse a few years ago when a decision didn't go their way. And I forget whether it's maybe when Kavanaugh was confirmed or whatnot, out and out threatening the Supreme Court. I mean, not just whining and moaning and beefing about a decision like Biden did today, but threatening the court. That's the sort of thing that makes this sort of victory, to be honest with you, even sweeter when it comes in the face of that sort of ill will by the Democrats.
I mean, because when Joe Biden comes out and says, Bob, he says, this is not a normal court. Well, what's a normal court? Would that be 7 liberal justices and 2 conservatives? Sorry, Joe, that's not the way it works. You know, you have presidents who name justices. You have people who make decisions about when they're going to retire. Ginsburg could have retired earlier, and that would have changed the composition of the court. She didn't, and that's the way it works. But I wonder what Joe Biden actually considers a normal Supreme Court when he declares that this Supreme Court is not normal.
It's who knows with him, because you can't tell whether he's speaking lucidly or whether he's just saying something that some staffer told him to say before he went out and stood behind the podium for a few minutes. You don't know. But to the liberals, not a normal court simply means a court that doesn't issue decisions that you, the liberals, agree with. That's all it means to them. The court is a vehicle that they want to implement their socialism, their ideas of social justice in this country, not the ideas that our founders had when they drafted and this country adopted the Constitution and then its Bill of Rights a few years later.
Hey, Bob, I want to ask you about what you wrote about Kevin McCarthy. I'm not a big McCarthy fan, so people should know by bias. I wasn't crazy about him, but we were kind of stuck with him, and there weren't enough votes to be able to get somebody different. So I said, okay, at least they held him to account and said, you've got to make certain assurances that things will happen. But he's trying to erase the official record of 2019 and 2021 impeachments of President Trump as though they never happened.
This is where we've officially, I think, entered the twilight zone. A couple of Trump. I didn't agree with Trump's impeachments in 2019 or 2021. I thought they were bogus, but they reflect the action of a House majority at the time. I didn't like it, but that's the historic reality. Now, there have been introduced 2 resolutions that would expunge both of those impeachments from the official record of the House. Now, it's bad enough when you have a couple of goofy members of Congress that introduce legislation like that. They can introduce whatever they want. But the Speaker of the House, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, has an obligation to stand up and be the adult in the room. And what McCarthy should have said when those resolutions were introduced just recently, he should have said, these aren't going to go anywhere. They may reflect the views of some members, but you can't undo what the House has done. Instead, he endorses them. He supports them, which is crazy. I mean, yes, I understand that it was a tight election back in January, and he has to be careful, that fine line that he walks. But for heaven's sake, stand up, be a man, take action that reflects the dignity, the professionalism, and the historic accuracy of what the House does. Don't cave into this sort of nonsense.
Well, and Bob, just two thoughts, because you're a lawyer, I'm not. But they impeached Trump 2019, they do it again 2021. I agree both were bogus for a whole bunch of reasons we've talked about plenty on the show. But 2019 is amazingly relevant to what's going on today, because we have a current president of the United States who's, I think, reliably accused of taking a major league bribe from Ukraine. And there's also indications he took money from China. And what was Trump calling Ukraine about? Saying, hey, there's corruption going on in your country that involves politicians from our country, and I'd like you to look into it. Now, the Democrats put this to the public as, well, this is a purely partisan move, just trying to dirty up a candidate. No, Joe Biden and his Biden crime family were involved in corrupt activities that generated millions of dollars, apparently, for the Biden crime family and maybe even for the big guy himself. It makes his impeachment in 2019 even more relevant because the Democrats were desperate to bury that thing because they knew, I think some of them actually knew that Joe Biden, or suspected it strongly, was involved in corrupt activities that had put millions of dollars in his pocket to allow him to live the kind of lifestyle he had, with all these monies in his bank accounts or his corporation that he can't explain where the money came from. It came from Ukraine and China. And it might even explain some of his policies toward Ukraine and China today. It's hugely relevant, isn't it?
It is, and it's really quite interesting and quite a coincidence how this has come full circle from Trump's impeachment in 2019, which I think, as we just said, was bogus. But now we have 4 years later, evidence that I think at least warrants on the part of the Republican majority in the House an impeachment inquiry.
Yep.
That is to at least tee up these issues, as I did back before Clinton was impeached, to begin with an impeachment inquiry. The Republicans certainly ought to do that. Now, is Hunter Biden a part of that? Probably so, but the real focus should be on Joe Biden, not Hunter Biden. But if looking into Hunter Biden then leads us to the truth or at least evidence of Joe Biden's corruption, which certainly seems to be the case, then that's what the Republicans ought to be pursuing.
See, and I'm with you, because the inquiry merely means you say, Congress, we're gonna have some hearings. We're gonna we'll get Tony Bobulinski up there, we'll get Devin Archer up there, we'll haul Hunter Biden in there and put him under oath. And say, hey, we've got these text messages you sent threatening that bad things would happen to China if Chinese companies didn't pay millions of dollars. And, oh, by the way, who did you mean when you referenced the big guy? And where was that money going? If it wasn't just going to you and your late brother's widow and those people, did any of it go to Joe? And you could ask a few of those questions, Bob, and they ought to call you up to do the questioning, because they can use an outside member or somebody who's a former member of Congress. They could do that. Bob, I really appreciate you coming on. The conversations are always great. That is Bob Barr, now first vice president of the board at the NRA. By the way, are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000? Well, employee retention tax credits, they're an incredible opportunity for you. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic. They've already helped out 1,500 small business owners get about $300 million in funding. And they know what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for these tax credits. And they're with you every step of the way, even if there's an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. safeguard. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, even if you already got the PPP money, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. And it's not a grant. It's not a loan. It's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with a team you can trust at Get My Funds, 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get to your phone calls and emails. I mean, I'm no whiz when it comes to investing. In fact, all I hope to do is put enough in our 401k that one of these days, I don't know, 10, 20 years from now, Tina and I could, stop working. But I really don't want to stop working. I love what I do. But having said that, when I put the money in that fund, that 401k or that IRA, I want the people who manage it to make as much money as they possibly can legally. Now, legally is an important part of it. Don't tell me you're going to, make me a lot of money by making methamphetamine or trafficking fentanyl into America. As long as it's legal, I want you to make the greatest amount of money. And yet along comes ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance, or ESG, is the basic idea is, well, there are the right things to invest in and the wrong things to invest in. And one of the biggest promoters of that nonsense is BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. Except now he's decided that apparently ESG has taken on kind of a strong odor, and it's not a good one. I brought on David Spica to talk about that, who's president and chief information officer at Guidestone Funds. David, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Lars. How are you?
I'm doing well because I'm not invested in ESG, but I have a feeling that the folks who offered this up, this ESG nonsense, along with DEI and CRT and all the other nonsense, they're not going to be content with just saying, come on over, invest in ESG. And I say, no, thank you. What they want to do is take entities like BlackRock and effectively force every company to do this. So I won't have any choice to invest in other than ESG companies because that choice will have been taken away from me. Are my fears warranted?
Actually, Lars, I liked how you opened this by saying that you want to generate a good return, but at the same time, you don't want to be forced to invest in companies that aren't consistent with your values. So,
right.
Yes, you do have an option. At Guidestone, we invest in a way that's consistent with conservative and Christian values. And we let you know that right up front. We're not going to pull the rug out from under you and all of a sudden start playing the climate change game and investing or not investing in companies associated with that. We're going to let you know up front that these are companies and these are investments that are consistent with your values.
And and listen, I believe in that as well, David. I mean, there might be things where I would make the choice to invest in a given sector, given part of the economy or a given business. I don't do that now. I just shovel it into the 401k and hope for the best. But I don't want those choices to be taken away from people either. And I do like the idea. If somebody says, I don't want to be invested in alcohol, okay, good for you. You don't have to. The rest of us might do that. We might not. Or there are people who don't want to invest in firearms. That's fine. It's a lucrative business. I wouldn't mind investing in stocks that own companies that make firearms. I happen to support the Second Amendment. If somebody says, I want to be out of that, that's fine. What I worry about is those choices being taken away where big entities, because BlackRock and the rest that are of that size, they have the capability to come in and say, let's starve out these industries and make them go away. That's really their goal, isn't it?
Well, what you're talking about, Lars, is the freedom to choose. Americans love freedom, and we should have the opportunity to choose how we invest. So the fear that BlackRock, Vanguard, whoever is going to take away those choices, that's not the case. There's too much money out there. There's trillions and trillions of dollars and trillions of investment firms out there that are giving you opportunities to invest any way you want, from firms that invest purely in companies that are in the S&P 500 to firms that are associated with ESG to firms that invest according to Christian values like us. So you have that choice as an American to invest the way you want. The thing you don't want is to invest in a certain fund or with a mutual fund company or an investment company, and all of a sudden, they're not doing what they told you they were going to do. They're violating their fiduciary responsibility to you by managing your money in a way that's not consistent with your values or how you thought they were going to invest. And that's the key. You want to know upfront, how is my money being managed, and is it consistent with my values, and is it earning the return that I need to achieve my goals?
Do you think most Americans are aware that this is what's being pushed on companies, and that sometimes these big investment firms will use their muscle to try to push companies around? I mean, for example, to some extent, I kind of feel sorry for the people at Target. They lost tons of money, and you say, well, Target made bad decisions. And I think, if I'm right, Target made decisions that they were pushed to make by the big investment companies like BlackRock. Am I wrong?
Well, to a degree, I think you're right, Lars, but I also think that companies like Target and Anheuser-Busch with the whole Bud Light promotion are really concerned about the Twitter mobs and about getting crucified by the Twitter mobs and by the social justice warriors, right? So I do think there is an impact that companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and others are having, but ultimately it's what society is pushing. What society is pushing is not what the vast majority of Americans want. What society is pushing is what the small minority want, and they're the loudest voices in the room, so they're driving it. So we have to be careful. We have to do our research. We have to do our homework, and as Americans, we have that freedom, but we need to do our homework. We can't just throw money into an investment vehicle and expect it to be consistent with our values and to earn the returns we need. We got to do that homework up front and understand what we're buying.
All right. So if you were describing this, I know you've described it generically as saying if you've got Christian values, probably more conservative values, invest in what your company provides. And I think it's a great service. And by the way, I have no dog in the fight, folks. I always disclose if I've got some, like I'm doing ads for you or something like that. I have none of those biases built in. I just like the idea. What does Guidestone Funds offer up?
Guidestone Funds invest in a way that's consistent with Christian values. So let me break that down for you, Lars.
Sure.
Pro-life, from conception to death, pro-gospel, pro-family. We want to serve the underserved. We want to do what Jesus told us to do. And so owning fossil fuels is clearly within the realm of what we're trying to achieve. If you think about people around the world and their economic viability, they can't have a quality of life without access to fossil fuels. They can't do it. I mean, it's a fact of life today that green energy cannot provide what people need. Cars that are not internal combustion engine cars or just electronic vehicles are not available around the world. People need access to fossil fuels, and so we want to give them access to products and services that can help them have a high quality of life at the same time being very focused on Christian values. And again, that's pro-life and pro-family at the top of that list.
Well, let me ask you this. For Tesla, probably a very good investment in some ways. We're close to the break, but if you invest in Tesla, you're investing in an industry that demands that little kids in Congo dig some of that cobalt out of the ground, aren't you? Is that a Christian value?
Absolutely. No, it's not. And, you really have to understand how companies operate. And a lot of these electronic vehicles use a tremendous amount of fossil fuels and a tremendous amount of minerals that to produce these cars that is not environmentally conscious.
Absolutely right. Thank you very much. David Spica with us. What if you could help turn back the clock and help your dog play like a puppy again, no matter their age? It's Lars, and it sure works for Sir Winston Churchill, my Bernese Mountain Dog. That's why Dr. Marty developed Nature's Blend, because your dog needs a diet full of real cuts of meat, similar to what they'd eat in the wild. Dogs go bonkers for Nature's Blend. When given the choice between Nature's Blend and the giant online retailer's #1 bestseller in dry dog food, a study shows 29 out of 30 dogs choose Nature's Blend first. Tori from Tulsa says, my fur baby is so eager to eat it. Other dog foods I've tried gave my sweet boy issues with allergies. They all went away with Dr. Marty's and Nature's Blend. Give your dog a food they'll love and help support their youthful energy, healthy skin, easy digestion, and a happy full life. For a limited time, claim 54% off Nature's Blend and get a free pack of premium dog treats from Dr. Marty Pets. Go to drmartypets.com/pets or text PETS to 511-511. That's text PETS to 511-511. Study available on request, message, and data rates apply. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. Anytime you hear the term burner phone, you probably, and I think you're right to do this, you think to yourself, that either involves a spy, it involves somebody in some kind of illegal business like human trafficking or maybe drugs, that sort of thing. That's what burner phones are all about. That's why you have burner phones, especially secret phones. And my friend John Solomon, political commentator and founder of JustTheNews.com, has broken a huge story that ought to be on the front page of every newspaper in America, and yet I haven't seen it anywhere but at JustTheNews.com. It involves a secret global burner phone bought and paid for by none other than Hunter Biden and supplied to his father, Joe Biden. John, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, great to be with you.
Now, you have a rather personal connection to that burner phone, and I want you to tell my audience what you did.
Yeah, listen, I don't know if it was a burner phone or not. What I do know is that there were some documents gathered by the FBI when they investigated Hunter Biden's business partner, Devin Archer, back in 16, 17, and 18. And I went to the courthouse, got these documents, and in those documents there were bills and credit cards and bank statements, and I saw a phone number that was associated to Hunter Biden. By this time, I had broken some of the big stories in 2019 about Hunter Biden, the famous "you don't get your $1 billion if you don't fire the prosecutor" brag that Joe Biden had made that became a big focus in that year. And I was having a hard time getting a fair comment from Hunter Biden. So I saw this number and I said, you know what? The right thing to do is try every avenue to get Hunter Biden to give me fair comment. So I called the phone fully expecting that I would get Hunter Biden, since the phone number seemed to be associated with him in these court records. And the person picked up, and the second they said hello, I knew exactly whose voice it was. I'd heard that voice for 30 or 40 years in the Senate, and I realized it was Joe Biden. And I said, Mr. Vice President? He said, yes. I said, I'm John Solomon. He said, sorry, I can't talk to you right now. And he hung up on me, and that was the end of my conversation. The phone, clearly was associated with Hunter Biden in the records that the FBI had gathered. Is it a burner phone? I don't know. Was it something untoward? I don't know. But we do know this. It was proof to me at the time, and we now have more proof of it, that the finances, the phones, and the business associations of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were far more commingled than what the president has acknowledged over these last many years.
Well, just to defend my use of that term, John,
sure.
When we say burner phone, you might mean something you pick up at Walmart or a convenience store.
Yeah,
buy it with cash. Don't get your face on a camera. Put it park it somewhere, and then when you need to make calls that nobody knows about, use that phone. In that sense, it's a burner phone in that if Hunter Biden ever wanted to get in touch with his dad when he was in the Senate, when he was in the vice presidency, even during the campaign, or now as president, I don't think he'd have any problem going through the official channels open to members of the family where they called the Secret Service, say, I need to talk to my dad right now. He could have done that. What would be maybe one of the only reasons that Joe Biden would want a secret back channel unknown number to be able to communicate with his son who, and I'll remind you, John, you know this better than I do, never talked business with his son, right?
Well,
or
that's
so he
one
says.
that isn't holding up very well on the scrutiny of facts and evidence, right? We know that. Now, listen, we don't know yet, and I hate to assume facts that aren't in evidence. I do know this. Later on, when we validated the laptop and we did additional document exploitation from the laptop, we found that Hunter Biden was routinely paying for many of his father's bills, including a phone bill and some other items. They're mentioned very clearly in accounting statements and in emails between Eric Schwerin and Hunter and others. In fact, Joe Biden felt like Hunter Biden was paying him so much money or picking up so much of his bills that in 2010, when he was vice president, he signed over his Delaware tax refund to Hunter Biden to repay some of that money. Why is that significant? Hunter Biden was getting his money from all these foreign oligarchs and other sources, and that means that Joe Biden was at least indirectly benefiting from some of the cash that Hunter Biden brought into the family. That's a story they denied in 2019, in 2020, in 2021. Joe Biden still denies aspects of it today. The evidence is overwhelming that these things happen. And the real question is, why can't Joe Biden be honest about small things like this? And the big question is, are they hiding a bigger secret? And I think the IRS whistleblower and the FBI whistleblowers now are giving us a sense that maybe there is a bigger secret we got to get to.
Well, I'm talking to John Solomon. You can find the stories at justthenews.com, but maybe we skip past it, but I want you to make a punctuation point on this one, John. This was not just your regular, I can go to Walmart. When my son came home during the Marines and he was going to be home for a month and we didn't want to buy him a brand new, we went to Walmart and bought a $30 phone, right? This was not one of those $30 phones that you buy at Walmart, was it?
my good friend Peter Schweitzer has talked about a global burner phone. I have no reason to doubt anything that he's 100% accurate. I really don't think this was a very sophisticated phone. I think it might even belong to one of the, the over-the-counter, the AT&Ts and Verizons of the world. It just showed up in a bill, and all I was trying to do was get fair comment for Hunter Biden. I was shocked that Joe Biden picked it up.
Didn't it say that the AT&T bill was $300 a month for that phone?
It was. That one was absolutely an expensive bill. I don't have proof that these two numbers are the same number. Unfortunately,
Okay.
I don't have that document because I left the Hill, so I can't do any more comparisons.
You're a careful guy.
Yeah, I want to be careful. And listen, we ought to be fair to the president, but we also ought to be tough if he's been lying to us. And I think now we know many of the stories Joe Biden told us aren't true about his son, about Burisma, about the business partners, about China. Here's a big thing. I think the most important thing to come out in the last week is we obviously saw the text message, and Hunter Biden will say whatever he says about the text message. But there's something that is much more problematic for Joe Biden. A family friend, Rob Walker, a guy who's been between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden for years, a family friend says, of course Joe Biden met with the Chinese energy officials in 2017. I saw it myself. I attended it. I was there. Joe Biden is now calling people like Rob Walker a liar when he says, I never met with the Chinese. Joe Biden is now has so many falsehoods that he can't defend because family friends, records, emails, billings all show these things occurred. At some point, he's going to have to face some accountability for routinely misleading the American people about these issues. And the question is, what's his motive?
Let me ask you this. Am I being naive if I said if a House committee with oversight authority were to call witnesses in, like Tony Bobulinski, who didn't show up in front of the grand jury in Delaware, and Rob Walker and a few others, and just ask a few specific questions, could they get enough to tell us, should Joe Biden be impeached because he's implicated in a multi-million-dollar bribe, maybe one from Ukraine, one from China? That alone should be, that makes Watergate look like nothing. I'll give you the last 30 seconds.
Absolutely. If the FBI informant is correct, that this is a very serious thing that Joe Biden is facing. There's lots of witnesses. The next one to watch, Devin Archer, that business partner, that one who I found the phone record from, he could testify as early as mid-July to the Congress. He knows everything that went on between Joe and Hunter Biden from 13 to 16. I think he could be the most important witness this summer sees.
And then maybe we get an impeachment. And I realize we get the crazy prize of Kamala Harris as the consolation prize if we get rid of Joe. But I almost think, I wish Kamala Harris on the Democrat Party. She is going to be as big a disaster for the Democrat Party as she is for anything else. And the best way, I know, sunlight's a great disinfectant. Put her in the top job and see how long it takes the Congress to say, nope, she needs to go as well. That's John Solomon. You can find his stories at justthenews.com, and you can always find me right here at The Lars Larson Show. So be sure to tell Alexa to play The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show, and welcome to a day on which the U.S. Supreme Court has made some great decisions, except one more is still hanging fire until tomorrow. And we'll be talking about that as well. First, welcome to the program, and glad to have you on board. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and I'm sure that some of you can come up with some great conspiracies to explain some of the decisions coming out of the U.S. Supreme Court. But in general, I'm very, very happy with what they've decided. And we're going to spend some time talking about that. But if you want to jump in to the best conversation in talk journalism, it happens right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, we put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. And a little bit later on this hour, I'm going to talk about the best of those decisions. I mean, if you can rank Supreme Court decisions that way, and I would, but they've made a decision to end the open race-based discrimination against Asian Americans in both private and public universities in America. And that is a great piece of news to come out of the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'll have some thoughts on that as well, but we'll get to that just a little bit later. But there are two other decisions, one of them that they made today, and it has to do with religious freedom. Let me get to that in just a moment. But I want to talk about the student loan decision that's going to come down tomorrow. We had kind of expected it today. The U.S. Supreme Court, I mean, technically, the court is never on vacation, but the court typically likes to take July and August, and they disappear from Washington, D.C. The place, after all, was a swamp until we made it our U.S. capital. And it's not a pleasant place to spend July and August. Believe me, I've been there in July. I've been there in August. It's not any fun. And say, thank goodness for all the air conditioning that's available. But the Supreme Court likes to take off. So we very much expect that tomorrow, within the next 24 hours, the U.S. Supreme Court will rule on Joe Biden's absolutely outrageous decision to try to give away $400 billion of your taxpayer money. Now, I know that some of you are affected by this. You would be the recipients of that graft because the Biden crime family engages in graft. I guess they figure, why not buy some votes? And that's exactly what Joe Biden and his administration are trying to do. Because Joe, as a candidate, made a promise that was a check he couldn't actually write. And the check was to pay off $400 billion worth of student loans. Now, if you say, well, Lars, are there that many student loans in America? Oh, there are far more than that. I think the current estimate is $1.7 trillion, about 4 times as much as Joe Biden is promising to pay off. But what he's promised is that if you have student loans, he will pay off up to $20,000 of those loans per individual. So if you have a married couple, he may be paying off $40,000 of debt that you agreed to take on. You got the education from it, and now you, in some cases, want somebody else to pay it off. I'm sure that all of us would love to have somebody, some rich Dutch uncle, come into our lives and say, hey, you know that big debt you ran up for that foolish degree you got from the university? I'm going to pay it off for you. Yeah. If it's a gift from a family member or a friend, fine. If it is stolen from the American taxpayers, and here's how Joe Biden had planned to steal it from the taxpayers. There's something called the HEROES Act. It was passed in the time immediately following the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And what the Congress did, was they passed a law. They knew that a lot of young men and women were in the military. They were first responders. They were the heroes after the terrorist attacks on America on 9/11. And they said, we should make sure that these young men and women do not end up with this massive debt hanging over their heads and they're unable to make the payments because we've sent them to Iraq or Afghanistan or some other foreign place. They've been called up for military service. They may be families adversely affected by the injuries and the deaths suffered in the terrorist attack, and they decided to reward those heroes by helping them out. What they didn't intend was that Joe Biden would say, hey, you went out and got a college degree. And it turns out that your only job that comes from that college degree, because it was in something simple like beetle tracking or button sorting or underwater basket weaving, and all you can do is pour coffee at Starbucks or some other coffee outfit, I'll pay off some of your student debt for you. He doesn't have the legal authority to do it. And I'm reasonably confident that tomorrow, and call me up if I'm wrong, I'll be glad to take the naysayer calls, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to confirm that Joseph R. Biden has absolutely no authority as president to manipulate the HEROES Act and give away $400 billion of taxpayer money and force people who have 60% or 70% of the U.S. population has never sat in a college classroom. They never got the chance to go to college, and we didn't need them to go to college. They went out and they actually worked for a living, and they pay taxes. And now for Joe Biden to transfer $400 billion of debt from a bunch of deadbeats who got the wrong degree, and it's the wrong degree if it won't pay for itself. It's not a very good investment. To transfer that debt to others is absolutely dead wrong. That decision is due, we think, tomorrow from the Supreme Court. But what did come down? Number one, the one we're going to talk about later on this hour, is the Supreme Court saying universities, public or private, are not allowed to discriminate for or against students based on their skin color. In this case, it was very smart, uber smart Asian Americans who said, I want to go to college. I'm going to study hard. I'm going to get great grades. I'm going to ace all those tests, and then I'll go to a school. And literally, some of those people were being told, no, you can't go to Harvard. You can't go to UNC, the two colleges that are involved in this Supreme Court case. And why? We're smart enough. Yeah, but you're the wrong skin color. If you were black or brown, Hispanic or African American, you'd be allowed to go to Harvard or any of those other schools. But because you're Asian, we're not going to let you. It is open. People will call it affirmative action. That's a nice name for something that's really ugly. It's called bigotry. It's called violating the U.S. Constitution and treating people differently based on their skin color or their ethnicity. And I'm glad the Supreme Court said no to that. But the very important decision that I want to mention to you that may not get as much attention today, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous vote, has said that when your boss, in this case the government, the U.S. Postal Service, says to you, you're a letter carrier, you've been delivering the mail for decades for us, we have accommodated your desire to be off on the Sabbath day on Sunday, but we're not going to accommodate you anymore. You either work on Sunday or you're going to be fired. The man's name is Gerald Goff, and he has won his case before the U.S. Supreme Court. The court, in a unanimous decision, said you can't fire somebody. You have to respect their religious beliefs and their accommodations. The Postal Service had done that for a long, long time, and then they refused to do it for Gerald Groff. And Gerald Groff went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he won his case. And it was a unanimous decision. Even the liberals saw that they had to get on board that, and thank God for all of that. Now, we'll talk more about that decision on the payoff of those student loans, and we'll talk more about bigotry, race-based bigotry at both private and public colleges. That's coming up later on this hour. In the meantime, your phone calls and emails at 866-HEY-LARS. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to take your phone calls and emails. And as you know, I'm a little bit on cloud nine right now because the Supreme Court has finally struck down what I call naked bigotry in college admissions. And I get a chance to talk to our old friend Devin Westhill, who hasn't been with us in way too long. He is the president and general counsel, that means he's a lawyer, for the Center for Equal Opportunity and a legal expert for the Federalist Society. Devin, it's good to have you back.
Hey, Lars. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Now, should I be as happy as I am about what the Supreme Court did today?
I think you should. In fact, there was quite a lot of talk after a case came down about race and voting a couple of weeks ago that maybe we weren't going to get the sort of decision that everyone thought we were going to get on the affirmative action front. But we did. And you should be, and everyone else should be, who is very serious about equal opportunity, equality under the law, should be very happy about what happened today. It's a very strong 6-3 majority decision that says, look, what Harvard and the University of North Carolina were doing in their admissions processes and giving preferences to some people and not others based on their race is unconstitutional.
Well, I agree. And Devin, I was amazed that more Americans weren't just apoplectic about this. There was an example that came up. It was one of the ones from the case from a few weeks ago. They said this poor kid, a young man, had a perfect SAT score, which doesn't happen that often, and had gigantic GPA. I think it was 4.65 or something. It was just like, okay, this kid is smart. He's applied himself. He's done all the skull sweat to be able to get to this point. And then he's told, sorry, you're Asian. Asians need not apply, even with perfect SAT scores. I would think that every American, except maybe David Duke and the Klan, would say, this is a great thing. You know, this is great. We gotta treat people right. And if you want to get into Harvard, you got to show up with some really great academics by whatever measure you want to make. And the fact that even 3 Supreme Court justices, the liberals, said, oh, no, we got to still, we can't be colorblind. We have to actually take color into account. Just it floors me.
Look, I think the vast majority of the country is in line with the way you feel and the way I feel on this, Lars. So don't be discouraged. Poll after poll after poll that comes in across racial lines, across ethnic lines, Americans agree that use of race or ethnicity in college admissions ought not to be legal, ought not to be something that schools are taking into consideration. So despite the fact that we have very extreme progressives who are very loud about their interest, right, in anti-racist discrimination, right, remedying past discrimination with present discrimination, I think the vast majority of the country actually is in line with the principle that all people in this country are created equal and they ought to be treated equal under the law.
Well, the other group that I really feel sorry for, Devin, although, I mean, if somebody comes along to a high school kid, man or woman, boy or girl, man or woman, and says, hey, you're going to get into Harvard, and you say, well, my test scores aren't very good, my GPA isn't stellar, and I haven't done all that, you would think that it would be humiliating to be told, well, in effect, I mean, they probably don't say it out loud, but they say, well, you're going to get into Harvard. Great, that sounds fantastic. Why am I getting into Harvard with my test scores and my GPA? And I don't know, what is it, a wink and a nudge? Well, it's because you're black or it's because you're Hispanic. But if you were Asian, boy, they'd show you the door. That has to be humiliating, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. It is. And for the rest of that individual's life, through college, their employment, and so forth, they are going to hold with them a stigma because of this, through no fault of their own, just by being born a minority in this country and going to college as I did and as I am at the University of North Carolina, as one of my alma maters. I carry with me this stigma that maybe I didn't really achieve the successes I achieved in life. I'm cheated as a result of that, right? I'm robbed of my pride, of my dignity of success, and that is one of the oftentimes overlooked tragedies of preferences.
So, Devin, I'm not a lawyer. You are. How in the world did the three liberals on the court figure out a way of doing legal gymnastics to say, no, it's still okay to take race into consideration? I haven't had a chance to. Sometimes I read the decisions. Oftentimes I don't because I don't have the legal knowledge. But how do they get to this point where they say, no, doesn't violate the 14th Amendment, isn't unconstitutional, it's still okay to do it?
Well, there are a couple of things. On the one hand, the three dissenters on the court suggest that, look, this has been what we have said is the law for a long period of time. We ought not to unsettle that, right? Folks rely on this.
Well, slavery was the law for a while. I hate to interrupt, but Devin, would that have worked back in slavery? We've had slaves a long time. You shouldn't upset the apple cart. It's really working well for us.
You should be on the court arguing with these folks. But at the end of the day, they get an opportunity to write, and they did write. And this is one of the things that they wrote, whether or not we agree with it. But on the other hand, there is a disagreement, even among some individuals on the right who are legal scholars, about what the original meaning of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause actually means. And those individuals who dissented from this case really try to pick that apart and suggest that the 14th Amendment allows race consciousness, especially in the educational context. But that argument did not win the day.
Equal treatment under the law is being debated as though you can't look at the law and say, okay, everybody has to be treated equally. Well, we can't push a little bit this direction or that direction if we take into account a person's skin color, where they go to church, what kind of sex they like, or anything like that. You can't do that. I mean, that how could they not understand what equal means equal, doesn't it?
Well, things were different when the 14th Amendment and the 13th Amendment, 15th Amendment, these post-Civil War amendments were ratified, right, after, for Reconstruction. And these individuals believe that race consciousness was embedded in this based on a number of historical factors, such as Congress setting up schools, for example, in the District of Columbia at the time to educate freed slaves. And the Freedmen's Bureau and a number of other provisions that suggest to them, at least, and to some other folks who are scholars in this area of history and of the law, that the 14th Amendment is not totally colorblind, as Justice Thomas suggests in his concurring opinion here, that it is. So it's just a difference of opinion when it comes to this.
Wow.
I don't think the dissenters were right, and they didn't win the day, as I suggested. So
we're not saying that Sotomayor could be standing there on the schoolhouse steps with Governor Wallace saying, hey, they got separate but equal. That's equal treatment under the law, right? I mean, it just seems comical to me that they're trying so hard to get to something that seems so wrong under the Constitution.
One of the important things to do, and you just did it, Lars, I think, is to flip this or to replace certain things, to bring things into clear perspective, right? What if it were the case that affirmative action was being used to promote white and Asian students and to downgrade black and Hispanic students? Would then it be okay? No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody would be okay with that. And we really need to be thinking about things in that very clear way.
I got to tell you something, Devin. You know the stats on men and women? I mean, men are actually a minority. We're less than 50. Women are more than 50. And when you go to colleges, I think women are close to 2/3 of the college graduates. And you could say, well, we're not graduating enough men. So let's put some clamps on the number of women who are allowed to go into college because they seem to do so well, like those Asian students did. So we're going to hold down women getting into college because they end up as 2/3 of the college graduates. Men who are not even 50%, they're a minority, they only make up about 1/3, a little more than slightly more than 1/3 of the graduates. We got to hold those women back and give the men a chance. Imagine Sotomayor standing up for that. Devin, it is great to have you back. I so appreciate it. That's Devin Westhill from the Center for Equal Opportunity and the Federalist Society. Hey, by the way, don't you love it when the pharmacy asks, do you want the name brand or the generic version? It's not always, but many times I say it, generic, please, because, hey, I like saving money. Wouldn't it be nice if you had that option with CBD? You know, you get high-quality CBD products without the name brand price. Well, now you can't. Check out my friends at Generic CBD. They buy direct from the manufacturer, cut out the middleman, pass the savings on to you. Each product made in the USA. Third-party lab tested for quality and strength, zero THC. Try it for 30 days. You'll love it or your money back. I'll tell you what, the muscle and joint cream, folks, that stuff's amazing. Remember, GenericCBD.com. The products are not sold in stores, so check them out at GenericCBD.com. That's GENERIC, GenericCBD.com. Your number one source for generic CBD. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. I want you to think about a rather radical idea which is already in use in Canada. And if you wonder why Canada, because I watch Western Europe and Canada, oftentimes there are crazy ideas that get going in places like Canada and Western Europe, and then they come to America. And I want to be ready for them. This one is particularly ugly. Imagine this. We are all, in a sense, terminally ill. That is, none of us is going to live forever. So we know we're all going to eventually die. But Canada is talking about harvesting organs from people who are mentally ill, who are not terminally ill, and even they started to call some of these patients track 2, as pointed out by our friend Wesley Smith, who's an author and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism, who I think he hates the idea just as much as I do, although he makes it one of his primary causes. He may hate it more than I do. But the idea that we would start treating people like organ farms and taking people who are not, understand the way I'm using it, terminally ill, not in the sense that you're going to die in the next year or 2 or 5, but you're going to just die like the rest of us die eventually, and hopefully as many decades down the road as we can, that they want to start turning these people into organ farms. And then, well, we'll get into the really weird moral hazard that Canada is setting up by saying, and you can say who gets the organs. Wesley, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Lars. Good to be back. And it's interesting. My first anti-euthanasia piece was published in Newsweek 30 years ago yesterday.
Wow, congratulations and happy anniversary, because you've been at this a long time.
Yeah, I wish I hadn't been. I wish it had gone away. But it's interesting that in that piece, it's called The Whispers of Strangers, and people can look it up. It's on the internet. I predicted that if you started legalizing assisted suicide and euthanasia, it would result in organ harvesting conjoined with euthanasia, what I said as a plum to society, to give society a utilitarian stake in people being killed or killing themselves. Well, that I was called an alarmist, I was called an hysteric, and of course I got the hate mail, people telling me I hope you get cancer and die, that kind of thing. But what actually happened is that starting in the Netherlands, moving to Belgium, and now in Canada, that is precisely what has happened. And what I wrote this piece in National Review about is that the Canadian Medical Association Journal just published an article saying the guidelines that doctors should follow when they decide, when a patient says, okay, when you kill me after I'm dead, take my organs. It's really ghoulish, and it devalues, as you mentioned, the humanity of the person. Instead of giving them suicide prevention so that they don't want to be killed, right, we say, oh, you want to be killed? Can we have your liver? It's really awful.
And in fact, Wesley, there's an idea I talk about on the show from time to time called moral hazard. It's, yes, and it has a bunch of different ways that it's exhibited. But for example, you usually can't buy life insurance. Husband or wife can't buy life insurance on each other for, say, $50 million, because then there's a moral hazard. If your wife or husband happens to meet an untimely end, then you get $50 million. And it creates a moral hazard. This seems like a moral hazard on steroids. You're going to go to somebody and say, you're not terminally ill, but if you check out early, that daughter, that granddaughter, that niece, or that brother that you love, like nobody's business, that person could have their life saved. If they need a heart, that's going to save their life potentially. If they need a liver, if kidneys you can live without, livers you can't, hearts you can't, lungs tough to live without a lung or at least one. And so you're going to go to this person and say, if you agree to check out early, take what they call medical assistance in dying, doctor-assisted suicide, we will let you direct who gets the organs. Isn't that going to set up a situation where you're going to be telling people you could save your granddaughter or daughter's life, but you got to kill yourself for it, and we'll help you do it?
Well, it certainly could come to that, and it's not assisted suicide; it's homicide.
Yes.
In Canada, it's doctors giving a lethal injection. So here's the circumstance: if a Track 2 patient is somebody who is not terminally ill, perhaps they have a chronic illness, perhaps they have a disability. If they decide they are eligible for euthanasia in Canada. So if they go to a doctor and they say, I want to be killed, what the doctor is supposed to do under these guidelines is assess them. If they are qualified, then say, yes, I'm going to kill you. Then the doctor goes to the Organ Procurement Association and says, this person's going to be killed, in 2 weeks. And then the Organ Association contacts the patient, says, can we have your liver? With regard to the directed donation, as you mentioned, if somebody wants to be, let's say somebody has a child, as you said, who needs a liver, and they have tissue compatibility, the person could go to the doctor and say, I want to be killed, tell the Organ Procurement Society, I want this liver to go to my daughter, and that could actually be the reason why they decided upon euthanasia.
Unbelievable. Because it would be. Because, Wesley, I mean, over the years I've seen lots and lots of stories, fiction mostly, where they imagine a circumstance. They say, what would you do in this circumstance if you're holding on to 2 children off the edge of the cliff, and one is your child, one is a stranger's child, but you realize you can only physically hold one of them and save their life? Who would you save? And things like that. This is that situation, except it's the entire medical establishment, at least in Canada, saying, yeah, we should open up the possibility for people to say, yeah, your daughter's going to die, unless, of course, you decide to kill yourself or let us help you kill yourself. So it is homicide. It is man killing a life, a human life. And if you do that, you'll save your daughter's life. This is outrageous. And the doctors are at least some of the doctors in Canada are endorsing this idea.
Well, the Canadian establishment, the political establishment, endorses the idea, and it isn't a doctor saying, "Oh, your daughter's sick, let me kill you." It's if a patient says, "Oh, I've got this problem that qualifies me for euthanasia," that could be the motive to say, because I want to give my daughter my liver, I want to be killed. But understand that doctors are also in Canada, at least in Ontario, not even allowed not to participate, because there was a lawsuit where they said, look, I'm Catholic, or I believe in the Hippocratic Oath. I do not want to participate in killing patients. And the courts of Canada said, too bad. You may have a right to religious liberty in Canada and a right to conscience in Canada, but the people who want to be killed have a greater right. And so if you're a doctor and you say, no, I will not participate in killing by either doing it or finding a doctor who will for a qualified patient, you could be charged in an ethics proceeding by the medical associations. So they're also wanting to force Catholic hospitals to participate. There was a hospice in British Columbia that refused to do assisted suicide, and because they accepted, socialized medicine, government money, the government closed them down.
Said you have to participate or else, or we take your money away.
That's right. That's correct.
And every other association saw that. All I'm saying is, Wesley, I understand right now it's first you're suicidal, and then you
right.
get to make the offer. But how long is it going to take for people to think, I could save my brother's life? He needs a heart. I'm older than he is. I could give him my heart. All I've got to do is check out early and kill myself and let the doctors kill me, that is. And I can give him my heart, and he'll get the rest of his life. It's not a hard stretch to imagine that person saying, I'm suicidal and depressed.
It's not a hard stretch. And as you mentioned, next year, the mentally ill will qualify for euthanasia. And this very guideline procedure that I just outlined will also apply to the mentally ill.
Unbelievable. That is Wesley Smith. You can read the whole piece he wrote at National Review. He's an author and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Pleasure to be with you on a Conspiracy Theory Thursday. Always glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. You can send emails to talk@larslarson.com. And if you're a naysayer, every once in a while, Seton Motley is a naysayer. He, of course, is the man who heads up the organization called Less Government, which we're getting more government these days. Seton, welcome back.
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm actually very thrilled by the decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court today and what I'm anticipating for tomorrow. I don't think they're going to tell Joe Biden that he has the authority under the law to pay off $400 billion in student loan debt. But, who knows? They might surprise us. John Roberts tends to be the guy who, will give us one decision and say, okay, I got to throw one to the other team just to keep things equal. I've never understood that guy. I don't think I ever will.
No, well, what I'm anticipating the colleges are going to do is they'll find some way to filter race in without saying they're filtering race in. I mean, this has happened before where there have been rulings that have curtailed affirmative action, and colleges just reword their application process.
I hope they get sued then. I hope they get sued.
This is what just happened again. I mean, they've done it before. They got sued again. They lost again. And they'll just tweak it and twist it and carry on as it was before. So we'll see. I mean, it is a good ruling. It's obvious that, the answer to discrimination isn't discrimination. That doesn't make any sense. So it's a good ruling. It's just a matter of whether the colleges will adhere to it finally.
Well, like you, I've been asking a bunch of the legal experts we've had on today how they expect the colleges to get around it. And I'm with you. I think they're going to say, well, we're going to pick kids from certain zip codes, or we're going to do this or that. They'll find a way to try to get around it. I kind of wish that what the Supreme Court would do, maybe it's not their job, but a federal court could say, we see that the colleges are not complying with what the court very clearly said, so we're going to appoint, I think they call it a special master, where they appoint a judge. And they say, if you have problems getting them to comply with this, go to that judge. And if it's a federal judge, he can say, oh, you're not complying, UNC or Harvard. Okay, we'll just slap some more, requirements on you. And maybe get their attention that way. Do you think that would work?
It all comes down to interpretation of what the colleges are doing. And I'm not optimistic because we've seen this, like I said, we've seen this. We've been doing this dance now for almost 30 years. A buddy of mine didn't get into UCLA and USC and sued and won, and that was 30 years ago.
Yep.
So and we're still doing this dance. So, I didn't message him. I should have messaged him today when the ruling came down just to see what he thinks. But I have a feeling I know that's probably why I didn't do it.
Well, let me ask you about what we had planned to talk about were independent agencies. So tell my audience what they should make of the fact that we have over 100 independent agencies that are still federal agencies, but they're somewhat independent, so they're under nobody's control?
That's I've said for years now that the Supreme Court has previously ruled that independent agencies are constitutional, which is bizarre and insane because the Constitution, Articles 1, 2, and 3, provides for three branches of government: legislative, judicial, and executive. So independent agencies can't be independent. They have to be under one of those three if they're going to be constitutional. And of course, it would most likely almost all of them or all of them would be under the executive branch because they're executing. They're implementing things. Now, the independent agencies were created by the Congress to outsource their responsibility of writing law. These agencies are writing law or vote. You see like the FCC or the FTC, quote unquote, voting on things. Well, these are unelected bureaucrats putting on the veneer of democracy when if they're creating something new, it has to be created in Congress.
Right.
They're supposed to execute. Congress writes the law and says, "Hey, FCC, impose net neutrality," and then the FCC imposes net neutrality. That's never happened. We've had multiple instances, as you know. As
well, you know what, Seaton?
For 13 years, they keep imposing it.
I can imagine going the other direction. You could say you're a somewhat independent agency, but when you want to write new rules, you bring them to us and you explain to us, the Congress, what they're going to do, and then we'll give our stamp of approval or not. And that would at least be some oversight, because then the agency would know, I'm to write up the actual nitty gritty details of how to regulate.
They do that, and they do that. I mean, it's not like it's a galloping secret that Democrats want to impose net neutrality. They've been doing it for 13 years.
But do they have to get a majority vote in the House of Representatives to get it through?
It has to be a law. The Congress has to pass something. They never passed a bill that says the phrase net neutrality in it. And the president has never signed a law, therefore, with the phrase net neutrality in it. So there's no preceding legislation that tells the FCC to impose it. That's why they had this veneer of democracy where 3 of the 5 unelected bureaucrats that run the FCC vote to impose net neutrality. And gee, there's been a vote, and they're going to impose net neutrality. Well, no, you're supposed to execute that's what I said in the piece. The FCC has been tied 2-2 for the entirety of Biden's presidency. It's doing everything it's supposed to do. It just can't do the stuff it's not supposed to do. With a 3 to that's what's been going on.
Do we have to thank Joe for that? Do we have to say, hey, Joe, thanks for that one?
Yeah, well, Joe nominated a 5th vote that was a very nice lady who's violently insane politically named Gigi Sohn, and she lingered for 2 years, and the Democrats wouldn't vote for her. Manchin and Sinema wouldn't vote for her, so it just remained 2-2. She finally withdrew herself. Now they've nominated someone else who also wants to impose Title II net neutrality, which means she's also not qualified for the 5th slot.
Unbelievable. That is Seaton Motley. He heads up the group called Less Government, and boy, could we use less government about now. Seaton, thank you. Hey, what if you could turn back the clock and help your dog or my dog play like a puppy again, no matter their age? Well, Sir Winston Churchill, he gets this treatment. That's why Dr. Marty developed Nature's Blend, because your dog needs a diet full of real cuts of meat, similar to what they'd eat if they were in the wild. Dogs go bonkers for Dr. Marty's Pets Nature's Blend. I know mine does. When given the choice between Nature's Blend and the giant online retailer with their #1 bestseller in dry dog food, a study shows 29 out of 30 dogs choose Nature's Blend first. Tori from Tulsa said, my fur baby is so eager to eat it. Other dog foods I've tried give my sweet boy issues with allergies. As soon as he switched over to Nature's Blend, all the issues simply disappeared. Give your dog a food they'll love and help support their youthful energy, their healthy skin, easy digestion, and a happy full life. For a limited time, claim 54% off Nature's Blend. Get a free pack of premium dog treats. Go to drmartypets.com/pets or text PETS to 511-511. That's PETS to 511-511. Study available on request. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show, and welcome to my favorite day of the week. It is First Amendment Friday, and a great time to remember the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution as we head into an Independence Day weekend. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to take your phone calls and emails, but I want to have a few things to say just off the bat about the decisions that have been made this week. Actually, most of them were made much earlier, but announced this week by the U.S. Supreme Court. You know, the court that liberals used to call the law of the land back when they were wanting to kill babies. Yeah, well, ever since the Roe decision was overturned more than a year ago now, and tens of thousands of lives have now been saved, the liberals have apparently decided they don't like the court. In fact, President Joe Biden actually described it as not a normal court. Apparently, Joe Biden thinks the Supreme Court is only normal when it reliably delivers liberal decisions. In this case, a single week with 3 major decisions not in favor of liberals. But if you listen to them, I'd love to hear the naysayers tell me why these are a bad thing. Now, if you'd like to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it happens right here every day. And on First Amendment Friday, it's a great time to sound off. We're a little more tolerant, if I can use a liberal word, We're going to be tolerant to all kinds of different points of view. And of course, with naysayers, you always go right to the head of the line at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. If you are a naysayer, you will be put up first. And of course, you can vote in our Twitter poll. The question today, because today the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to take up a really, really thorny issue. Should a man or a woman merely accused but not convicted of domestic violence lose the right to own a gun? Now, I have a few things to say about that in a short time, but the Supreme Court agreed today to take up the issue of whether or not people who are merely accused of domestic violence but have not yet had their day in court and been found guilty or not guilty, the justices will hear a Biden administration appeal in defense of a federal law that says that if you are merely accused of domestic violence, if there is a restraining order, then you are prohibited from owning guns. And this is one that I was waiting for the court to take up. I love the fact that they've decided this is a constitutional issue. I'd remind you, the U.S. Constitution says no man or woman's life, liberty, or property, in this case guns, it would be liberty, may be taken without due process and just compensation. If the law currently says if you're merely accused of domestic violence, if a restraining order has been issued but nothing has been proved at that point, do you lose your Second Amendment rights altogether? I would answer no, you don't lose them at that point. I've never been the subject of a restraining order. I've never been the subject of a domestic violence accusation. So I'd like to know whether or not you think the court should decide that one, how they should decide it. I framed the question this way, and I think it's fair. Should a man or woman merely accused of domestic violence lose the right to own a gun? But let me talk about what happened this week. A florist, a cake baker, and a website designer walk into a wedding. And now the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled the government has no right to supersede or impose on them on their free expression. Citizens enjoy what John F. Kennedy called the God-given rights that we have under the First Amendment and all the other Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. The First Amendment forbids the government from telling the citizens it allegedly serves what they must or cannot say. The specific case that was announced this morning involves a Christian web designer from Colorado who chose not to apply her talents to same-sex weddings that conflict with her personal faith beliefs. That's another part of the First Amendment that liberals seem to hate. I love that part of the First Amendment. I can only hope that this court applies today's ruling to Barronelle Stutzman, the flower arranger from Washington's Tri-Cities, whose case went twice to a very different Supreme Court about 5 years ago, and she lost. Perhaps this will reverse that loss. This marks the second big week for individual rights, win for individual rights this week, since the court decided yesterday that colleges and universities are forbidden to discriminate against smart Asian American students who were denied admission to college, not because they weren't smart enough, they were way smart enough, but simply because of their racial background. Now, today we got the trifecta for the week. The court decided that slow Joe Biden has no right to give away $400 billion of your taxpayer money to college students who went to school for a number of years and got bad degrees. And if you want me to define what I mean by bad degrees, I'd be glad to tell you what I think is a bad degree if it isn't already obvious to you. And now they don't want to pay the bill that they incurred. Now, this is a fantastic way to head into Independence Day weekend because the Supreme Court has given us 3 big wins. The liberals are going crazy. They're bad-mouthing the court every chance they get. I would predict that in the weeks and months ahead, you're going to hear American liberals propose that they want to see the court packed. They want to pack it with as many justices. They've tried this scheme a number of times. It has never really worked. So why don't we start off First Amendment Friday with what's really great, a great naysayer. Ralph is a naysayer on the Supreme Court. Ralph, welcome to the program. Let's get right to what you and I disagree with. What is it?
The time, but I have to say elections have consequences, and I think that's what Democrats are forgetting about when they complain about the Supreme Court. Conservatives have been so much more effective, as you know, over the last decade or two, organizing state legislatures and getting the justices they want on the high court with a president that will appoint them. Elections have consequences. Sorry, Democrats, do a better job electing presidents who can appoint Supreme Court justices.
Well, and then there's the individual choice of the justices, Ralph. If I can throw this in, I don't imagine you'll disagree with this. Ruth Bader Ginsburg could have retired a bit earlier and have been replaced by Barack Obama. She chose not to do it. She wanted to hang on to that power to the last possible second, and the consequence was that she was replaced by somebody else. So, she made a mistake. She could have decided otherwise. And it does give all of us pause when we say, should we really have Supreme Court justices serve for life, especially when their lifespans are now running into the 80s, late 80s, and 90s in age terms? Or should there be a term for Supreme Court justices? Right now, the Constitution says that you serve for life. You serve until you decide to quit. In that case, her decision not to quit a little bit earlier really made things different, but in a good way as far as I'm concerned. Would you agree?
Yeah, Lars, I think you got 2 points there. The term limit question, I think Democrats like to talk about, especially right now, because it gives them an opportunity to conceivably vote somebody out who they don't like. Maybe it's a 9-year term on a rotating, you vote for somebody every year. But then when you were talking about when to retire for a president who might appoint a judge.
I think you're right. Pleasure to be with you. And if you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's easy. 866-HEY-LARS. And naysayers go to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. You're listening to First Amendment Friday, heading into Independence Day, and the Lars Larson Show.
When you go to school, it should be a rule. The debt is yours alone. The court said no to Sleepy Joe. You can't cover all the student loans. They ruled 6-3. Joe lacked authority to throw the leftist bone. An enormous cost. Thank goodness Biden lost on his cover of the student loan.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. That's our great parody guy, Jim Gossett, singing about today's Supreme Court decision announced that Joe Biden lacks the authority to give away $400 billion of the taxpayers' money to pay off student loans. I would call them bad loans because they were loans taken out by young men and women, probably pronouns too, who decided to get a loan on an education that didn't turn into a degree that led to an actual paying job other than pouring coffee or something like that, and they want somebody else to pay the bill. So I thought I'd ask Casey Maddox about that. He's Vice President for Legal and Judicial Strategy at Americans for Prosperity. Casey, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Now, I'm thrilled with this decision, but I want to get your perspective from my audience about this because the left is saying, oh, this is outrageous. It's crazy. Joe should be able to just pay off a whole bunch of loans, $400 billion or so, about a quarter of all the outstanding student loans that are out there right now. And he should do it with money that I pointed out has, for the most part, come from people who've never sat in a college classroom. Was this a win?
Well, it's a win if you care about democracy and constitutional government, much less, are concerned about out-of-control spending. I mean, this is a significant decision if you consider the alternatives. If the Supreme Court had not stopped this Biden administration attempt, this was only $400 billion or so. But there was really absolutely no limit to the reasoning from the administration here. They could have forgiven all loans completely. You could have been dealing with trillions and trillions of debt that they could have piled on Americans in a cynical effort to try to win an election. So, he did not have the power to do this. The president has admitted that before. And even in his comments this afternoon, he's not attempting to actually argue that he had the power to take the step that he did. So this is a win, I think, all around for Americans and the rule of law.
I guess and I have the concern that he's done this a number of times. In fact, Casey, I've lost count. Maybe you've kept count of the number of times he's tried to do things like say, I'm going to have OSHA make everybody take the jab, get the mRNA shot. And that failed because the court said, no, you don't have that authority. If Biden had received a yes today from the Supreme Court, even a 5-4 yes, he could have taken this not just to student loans, but to a lot of other things, couldn't he?
Absolutely. Even look, I'll say it this way, even a future Republican president who might do things that I might substantively like That still doesn't mean that I want the president to just be able to willy-nilly make decisions that are entrusted to our representatives in Congress. And so, it was a very dangerous step that Biden had taken here, and especially when he had previously acknowledged that he did not have the power to do this. I mean, it's an abdication of your role as president, your oath of office, to acknowledge you don't have the power to do something and do it anyway, and then try to make it sound like that, the court is the bad guy for telling you what you had already told people you didn't have the power to do.
Well, and what should we make of the fact that the comment yesterday really got in my craw about when Biden said this is not a normal court. Now, he's not just pushing the line. He's saying he's criticizing the judiciary, one of the three separate branches, and saying they're not normal. Now, I don't know exactly what's going on in Joe Biden's head, but what do you think he meant? And what's he trying to get at to say this is not a normal court, so they're going to create a normal court by packing it or some other mechanism?
Well, I certainly hope not. I mean, he did say in another statement that he still disagreed with court packing. But I tell you, I mean, this is not a normal presidency when you have the president openly acknowledging, I don't have the power to do this, and then soon thereafter doing it. And you're right, this has not been the only instance where that has occurred. With the vaccine mandates and many other situations, the president has just clearly not had the power to do things that he has then ordered people to do in the administrative state. And that's not that's not, it's at least not normal under the Constitution. That's not how our process is supposed to work, according to the Constitution. So, before you even get to the hundreds of billions of dollars and the impact that has on our economy and on inflation, this is it's just fundamentally a question of how is our government supposed to operate.
And I guess, Casey, that kind of goes to a question I wanted to ask you about. One of the most common questions I get from listeners to this show is they say, well, is this legal, what he's doing or she's doing, whoever it happens to be, whether it's a governor or a president or anything else? And I say, no, it's not. And they said, well, then if it's not legal, there should be somebody to stop it. The founders were brilliant when they wrote the Constitution, but they kind of assumed that everybody would go by the rules. And yet in many cases, we've seen that when you have somebody like Joe Biden, that he may just say, I don't care what the rules are. I'm going to do whatever I want, and I'll only be stopped when somebody actually calls me on it, as the three dissenting justices did when they said, oh, we don't even think these students, that they're standing here. So what do you do about a government when the folks in the government, whether it's Joe Biden or somebody else, says we don't care what the rules are, we're going to do whatever we want, and the only way you can stop us is a long, torturous process through the courts?
No, that's right. I mean, fortunately, you have the courts willing to step in here. But the other important check there, what you're supposed to have, is a jealous legislative branch that steps in and says, no, you can't take our power, regardless of party. Both Republicans and Democrats should be stepping in and saying, look, this is our responsibility. This is what we're sent to Washington, D.C. to do, is to decide questions like this, how to, taxation and spending, creating a budget. That's the job of Congress. And so that should be what's happening. And we've got to get back to a place where the branches of government are effectively checking each other and not simply putting all of that burden on the Supreme Court to be the ones to come in and say, look, guys, we're just reading the Constitution. This is what it said.
Except instead of being jealous, I think they're lazy. And I'd put the laziness on both sides, Casey, because they've said, yeah, the courts are doing this for us. We don't have to vote on all these thorny issues on Capitol Hill. We get to keep our sweet jobs and our paychecks and our pensions and all the accolades that come along with being a senator or a rep, and somebody else will do the dirty work, and we'd rather have the courts do it. What do you do when the legislative side of the federal government turns lazy?
No, that's right. So I think this is where your listeners, all of us, come in. And the answer to that is we've got to elect members of Congress who are going to take their job their job seriously, and acknowledge that they're being sent to Washington, D.C. to make sure that that they do a certain job as legislators, and that's the power that we are giving them as members of Congress, not giving to the president. We're giving that to them, and we expect them to exercise those powers and hold the president accountable.
Well,
so I think it's important that people speak up and let your members of Congress know that Even if you had liked the action the president was taking, that it wasn't his power, and that matters.
That's Casey Maddox, who's the Vice President for Legal and Judicial Strategy at Americans for Prosperity. By the way, don't you love it when the pharmacy asks, do you want the name brand or the generic version? It's not always, but many times I say it, generic, please, because, hey, I like saving money. Wouldn't it be nice if you had that option with CBD? You get high-quality CBD products without the name brand price. Well, now you can't. Check out my friends at Generic CBD. They buy direct from the manufacturer, cut out the middleman, pass the savings on to you. Each product made in the USA, third-party lab tested for quality and strength, 0 THC. Try it for 30 days. You'll love it or your money back. I'll tell you what, the muscle and joint cream, folks, that stuff's amazing. Remember, GenericCBD.com. The products are not sold in stores, so check them out at GenericCBD.com. That's GENERIC, GenericCBD.com. Your number one source for generic CBD. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. Back in a moment, it's First Amendment Friday, heading into Independence Day weekend, and you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'll get back to your calls shortly, but I want to talk to my friend Hans von Spakowski, who's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, about a rather recent decision by the Supreme Court. We did talk about it at the time it was decided, but the Supreme Court effectively said, okay, we're not going to allow North Carolina to make its own decisions through the legislature about how you rewrite some of the congressional maps for the state. And I'd always understood that that was something the states had a right to do on their own and that it couldn't be taken away from the people's representatives. So let me throw that one at Hans. Hans, welcome back to the program. And should we understand this as a failure for all of America?
Oh, it is. And probably the most ironic thing about this is that Barack Obama sent out a tweet after this decision came out thanking the Supreme Court because he said if they'd come out the opposite way, it would have been an attack on democracy. Well, in fact, what the Supreme Court did is opened up attacks on democracy. What folks need to understand is what was behind all this. Remember, the legislature in North Carolina had drawn up new congressional maps.
Right. Just like every state does after the census, right? Yeah.
Right. This was challenged. It went to the state Supreme Court. There was no finding that what they did was somehow discriminatory under the Voting Rights Act. No violation of that. No, the state Supreme Court, which was controlled 4-3 by liberal Democratic judges, said, these maps are no good because they are a partisan gerrymander. They were drawn to favor the Republican Party, and that violates the state constitution. The problem with that finding was that there is not a single word in the state constitution about partisan gerrymandering. The 4 Democrats on the court, they just made that up. It was a nakedly political partisan decision. So the legislature appealed that to the U.S. Supreme Court because they said, look, the elections clause in the U.S. Constitution, which governs the election of members of Congress, says the time, place, and manner. In other words, all the rules governing congressional elections, the authority to determine that is given to the state legislatures.
Yep.
And the state Supreme Court has basically violated that provision. And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, said, state legislatures are still subject to judicial review, the exercise of state judicial review. Well, nobody was arguing that courts don't have the ability to review things the legislature does when they have a legal authority to do it. But here, the state Supreme Court was just acting politically. It had no authority to do it. And when they did that, they were violating the U.S. Constitution.
Well, let me step back just a minute, because I admire the Constitution and the geniuses who wrote it, and the idiots who are now sort of operating it don't seem to always get it right. The folks who founded this country said every 10 years you count all the people. and then we'll leave
Right.
the election, the elections up to the people's representatives in each of the respective states. 13 at the beginning, 50 now, 58 if you're an Obama fan. And so they knew to a certainty that it was going to be a partisan exercise, did they not?
Yes, absolutely. And it's been a partisan exercise since after the very first census more than 200 years ago.
And they didn't say, and the state Supreme Court, which may have a different balance, as you point out, North Carolina's legislature is conservative, its Supreme Court is liberal. If the courts in a state can overturn anything the legislature does, starting with writing new congressional maps, then that means the people's will, which they express by electing representatives to go to the legislature and do all the various things like write laws, get rid of old laws, let's hope, and redraw congressional boundaries, that's what they want. This is the expression of democracy, or the democratic elements of our republic, where the people's representatives say, we're going to draw the map. Did the founders of the country know it was going to be partisan? Oh, yeah. They knew that some years, some states would have a conservative legislature, some years you'd have a liberal legislature, and you take what the people elect. And then you allow seven or nine it was nine members of the North Carolina Supreme Court to overrule what the people's representatives say? That doesn't sound constitutional at all.
Well, no, I don't think it is. By the way, it is 7 members. You got it right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The first time. Yeah. Look, the one good thing that you can say out of this, what the U.S. Supreme Court did, that was a mistake. The one good thing we can say, though, is remember, the original decision of the state Supreme Court was 4-3. Fortunately, in last year's election, 2 of those liberal justices failed in their re-election efforts. 2 conservatives replaced them. And so in December, the state Supreme Court reconsidered that earlier decision and threw it out and said, look, there's nothing in the state constitution that gives this court the ability to draw these lines. That is specifically given to the legislature. So fortunately, that decision was thrown out. But in fact, this is bad for the future. Because you just think about the kind of litigation we're now going to see, and liberals going to court all over the country. If they can't get done in the legislature what they want to have done when it comes to elections, they're going to go to the courts and say, here, you should just overrule the legislature.
No, because the idea that people, even if they're elected to the court, they're supposed to read the law, read the Constitution, and rule on
right.
how given cases decided under the law and under the Constitution. It's not for them to decide we should do it this way or we shouldn't do it that way. They've got a set of rules, enforce the rules. They didn't do that. Why did the Supreme Court go this direction then?
Look, I just
Supreme Court of the U.S.
I just can't answer that. I mean, it was Chief Justice Roberts again writing the opinion with very vigorous dissents, particularly by Justice Thomas, who I got to tell you, boy, Justice Thomas is so good. He wrote this terrific dissent criticizing what they were doing, but this was another bad decision by the court. You know, we've gotten, unfortunately, a series of them, and it makes me very concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow is another day of the Supreme Court releasing its final decision. This is the last week, and we've got one of the most important cases still pending. You know, that's the racial discrimination lawsuits against Harvard and UNC.
And do you read that this court is trying to do, again, politics? Instead of saying you can't discriminate against people or in favor of them based on their race, religion, or national origin, but they'll say, oh, yeah, but we don't want to show ourselves to be a partisan court. How much of this is being driven by John Roberts and his concern about the sort of the image of the court versus, what it actually says in the Constitution?
I think actually you've put your finger on the problem. I think that concern often clouds his judgment. He's so concerned about not looking political in the decision making that he makes them look political. and I'm afraid that, like I said, I'm still hoping for the best, with that college case, and remember, we also still have the student loan case.
Yep, we
that
have
we
both
still
of those.
haven't heard a got decision on. Yeah. So
And they need to slap down Joe Biden, but hard. That is Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation. Back in a moment, I'll get to your calls. 866, hey Lars. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I want to mention the new Indiana Jones movie, and I want to suggest to you, you should not buy a ticket. You should not go see it. Now, obviously, the choice is up to you whether or not you do that or not. I don't sponsor boycotts, but I will tell you this. I was persuaded by a friend of mine, Jason Williams from the Taxpayers Association, who's also a fan of movies like me. And he said, look, Indiana Jones #5 is wrong in so many ways. And where's it coming from? It's coming from the Disney Corporation, which has been wrong so many times because they went woke and now they're in the process of going broke, not just at their big theme parks, Disneyland and Disney World, but apparently on their movies as well. They've already lost an estimated $900 million on their last 8 movies. And if you say, well, Lars, you're just piling on with Indiana Jones #5. No, Jason actually gave some good reasons because apparently it is packed with politics. And let me suggest to you that he made a great argument that the Indiana Jones movies were actually about something good. If you go back and look at what George Lucas did at the very beginning of the Indiana Jones series, more than 30 years ago, he had a lot of pressure, Lucas did, to make Indiana Jones a gambler or a drunk or in some way a flawed character. And he said, no, you know what? I want Indiana Jones to be a role model. I want him to be honest and true and trusting. And as Jason points out, that was the case for the first 4 movies, really, over 3 decades. And then Disney got its grubby, woke hands on the thing, and they've just done a lot of damage. So here's what he's arguing, is that if you go to this movie, that Disney has used the movie not just to make an entertaining film you can go to in the summertime, and 4th of July weekend, Independence Day weekend, is a great big weekend for people to go to movies, especially since it promises in many parts of America to be very, very hot. But he says they're using the film to take political hot pot shots. One line of dialogue is about the magic treasure that keeps changing hands. And the line goes, you stole it, then you stole it, then I stole it. It's called capitalism. He says the fact that this line is in the main preview of the film shows that Disney is willing to showboat their politics at the very center of the film's promotion. It's not just about an adventure. It's about saying capitalism is evil. And then he points out that they've had a series of films in which capitalism gets bashed and socialism gets praised. The other thing it did that he noted is that Lucas made a pledge because obviously the Indiana Jones series has involved Nazis. And what he said was, when he was doing the filming of these films, he said he didn't think he fully represented the evil of the Nazis. And during the filming of the third movie in 1989, before he did Schindler's List, Spielberg's conscience was so conflicted that when the actors portraying Nazis would do the Nazi salute, he made them cross their fingers behind their backs. Now, you say, well, that's a small thing. It's a symbolic thing. Yeah, so's the Nazi salute symbolic. It's symbolic of real evil. So then in the new movie, under Disney control, the film goes back to not just portraying Nazis, but they put Indiana Jones in a Nazi uniform, and they made the bad guy a guy who says, yeah, Hitler made mistakes. I will correct those mistakes. They make him a good guy, sort of, a bad good guy. And then he points out that he says it has shallow, morally bankrupt heroes. When the character of Indiana Jones was first created, there was pressure to make him a gambler, an alcoholic. George Lucas said, nope. I want to make Jones a role model. And he did that. But then what happened in this one? They turned Indiana Jones into a drunk, into a lazy guy, into a guy who doesn't necessarily do the right thing. I think he's right about this. And apparently the audiences are listening. An awful lot of the theaters for this $400 million movie, one of the most, if not the most expensive movies in American history, the theaters are turning out to be empty because I think people are onto what Disney has been doing. To your calls now. Let's go to Christine. Hey, Christine, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. I take it you saw the Twitter poll or heard the Twitter poll that I rolled out because the Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case this coming fall. Their term is ended now. But what they're going to hear is whether or not somebody who's merely accused of domestic violence can lose his or her right to buy a gun or possess a gun. What do you think of that?
I think that's horrible. And let me tell you the story of my brother. My brother is, and this, just in case people don't think about this, my brother is in the military. He's a hunter. He has a few guns. He's generally a very good guy. Unfortunately, when he was young and stupid, he married a woman who was extremely manipulative and later found out that she had mental illness. Back about 15 years later, she left him. They had 3 kids. And when she finally left, and he tried to convince her to save the marriage, wasn't working. He knew that she went off the rails from time to time, and wisely he gave his guns to a friend to keep in storage because she twice accused him of domestic violence. He did not. He was not violent toward her or the kids, but she did that simply in order to keep him away from their children. And it took 2 years for him going through counseling where he could only see the kids with another person in order to actually have the freedom to again see his children, and he was completely innocent. In the meantime, her brother, his former wife's brother, was accused of domestic violence, actually did attack his wife. And he didn't get, he may have been in jail overnight, but didn't get anything else. But it's just to show you that the courts are not as just as we would like them to be.
Yep.
And a simple accusation puts this whole process in order. And, there's reasons why you have to vet someone if they've been accused. But
I agree.
Like in my brother's case, he was innocent, and it caused him years of not being able to see his children. So,
and that's a very good example of how that can go very, very sideways. Let's go to Henry, who wants to talk about. Hang on just a second. Let's go to Henry. Henry, you want to talk about Joe Biden, our confused commander-in-chief? What do you want to say?
Yeah, Lars, as usual, you and I agree again. That guy's a pervert.
Yes, he is.
And I'm going to keep this PG rated because you're running a family show here. And
Thank
you're
you
of honor.
Thank you for that.
I read this week in a national publication that I'm not going to name. The headline said the president made shocking comments about Ivanka, says ex-staffer. And then the quote is that the president asked what it would be like to have sexy time with her.
Oh, my God.
And I think that's just disgusting. I mean, I've thought about that myself, but from the privacy of my own basement, not the White House. Joe Biden is 78 years old. What is he lusting after Ivanka Trump for? That's just disgusting.
I would agree with you, and I think what's more disgusting is Joe Biden's actual behavior around women who are not part of his family. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.